Forkkio, CEO of Represent Justice. Welcome to the Represent Justice post-election Facebook Live discussion. We'll be talking about initial reactions from what happened at the general election last night and is still happening, and talking about some of the important developments from around the country, including here in California. A lot of interesting things to talk about. If you have any types of questions, please do submit them in the chat. We can go ahead and read them and answer them. I'm joined today by two incredible individuals, our system impacted ambassadors who are experts in justice reform, incredible advocates, and will share their perspectives on a lot of what has happened tonight. That's April Grayson and Jarrett Harper. And we're so happy to have you here with us, April and Jarrett. And I want to start by just talking a little bit about the general election. I think, like most people, we were on edge. I was on edge watching the events unfold last night and kind of understanding what the public sentiment was around choosing a new leader. I think a lot of people are anxious. A lot of people are in some ways disappointed by the rhetoric that they're seeing, the discussion that they're seeing. And in some ways, this is a big wake-up call for a lot of people. And so I would ask you, April, maybe starting with you, what your initial reactions were from watching the general election come in last night and kind of seeing how the discussion went around the results and just the challenges and the contentious nature of what was happening.
So a lot of my thoughts leading up to the election, I tried not to focus too much on it because we've been watching for the last few years the condition of our nation and the condition of the people who are the voters, the heart condition of people. And so last night, watching the closeness, watching the conversations, understanding that it all boils down to people's heart conditions and where are they at right now and where do they stand, and realizing that the issues that we face and that we're dealing with, that we're voting on, are historical issues that we have been trying to overcome for hundreds and hundreds of years. So for me, as a voter, an informed voter, I just was looking at this as a heart condition, like where are these people's hearts at? And are we really gonna see the change and the reform that we really need to see as people of color, as Black people who have been fighting for basic human rights, equal rights forever.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, it's interesting how often people forget the long history and the long shadow, quite frankly, of the system that we're trying to change. And so, Jarrett, interested if you had also some thoughts on the current results. Obviously, we're not sure who the president will be, and there's a lot of rhetoric and talk happening on both sides. But what's sort of your heart telling you at this moment, watching all of this unfold?
When I looked at it, I saw a lot of fear being pumped out into society, and I knew that the power within that vote was going to begin to create that peace, that balance that we were all searching for on both sides. So to actually, be in this position now, to where we're able to see where people's hearts are at, as April said, right? We're able to really check people's hearts. To actually see Proposition 17 passed, to see a no on Prop 20, to see a no on 25, to see to actually see care first instead of incarceration with Measure J. Mm-hmm. It really goes to that heart condition. But at the same time, we know that we are a state filled with people, millions of people. And although, in some of those polls, the actual gap is closer than it should be, right? So that means there's millions of people who still believe that equality isn't for everyone. They still believe that those racist practices that were imposed on Black people and brown people are actually right. You know, so it really left me thinking there's still so much to do, but at the same time, we have to rest and rejoice. And I think today we rejoice because of the heart condition. We're actually getting better. That's how I'm choosing to see it. We're getting better. There's still a lot of work to do, but to actually be in a place of healing after being so sick, you know, living inside a prison, living in a country that still imposes slavery on people, to actually see that we're getting better was really rewarding, even though there's still a lot of work that needs to be done.
Yeah, absolutely. And, you know, I choose also, Jarrett, like you to tap into the work remaining, but also the progress that has been made. And I think, you know, there's a few areas of progress that we can look at and point to. I do think the turnout was historic, and that's really powerful and important. I think that what we're going through now, as some of the states have highly contested elections, some of these states may end up having recounts. It really is hitting home for people that not just is it important to get out and vote, but it's important to get out and vote for your elected officials down the ballot. If you look at who's got the responsibility for ensuring, you know, a safe election and secure election, who's got the responsibility ultimately of standing up to challenges to the election, you know, many of these positions are elected. And so these are people that we need to be familiar with at the state level, and we need to sort of hold our Congress members accountable as well, because they end up, even at the Supreme Court level, nominating and confirming, you know, the justices there. So, you know, I'm curious if you both are also seeing the same optimistic point of view of at least people are aware that their vote matters, their vote is important, their vote is not guaranteed. Jarrett, as you mentioned with California, which I want to get to soon, the Prop 17 in California, voting is such a privilege. Voting is taken for granted and is often very difficult, and has historically been challenged, and you know, people have been disenfranchised from voting. And so I think, curious if you both feel like there's less of that being taken for granted and more of a recognition of this is a responsibility. We have to vote for people who can't vote for themselves, and what your thoughts are on that on a big national level.
So I do want to make mention or piggyback off of what you said earlier about this was a historical moment. Like we were voting at record highs. And so the fact that the nation showed up for this vote is amazing. I think that a lot of the job was on the organizers to ensure that we were organizing in our communities and organizing on local, state, and then national levels so that we were getting information out. Because a lot of this, I think, has been lack of information. We've been dealing with voter suppression for so long that's even something that we have to overcome as people. We have to overcome ensuring that we are getting out this information so that people are informed voters and not just showing up to just vote, but are you showing up with an informed decision? Did you Google these people? Are you following who's on these ballots? Do you know what they stand for? And so just knowing that us as organizers, we showed up to this fight as well. And then the people showed up to the election. So that was really amazing to see. I do think that it's important that we do know who has power, so that we do know like who your district attorneys are, who that these are voted in positions, that you do know who your sheriff is, so that you know that every time that we see something on a local level and we feel like there's an injustice or something's not being happened, that's up to us to make that decision, to go show up at the polls to ensure that we are voting and putting people in these offices who have our same agendas and not their agenda, and seeing like, where does this line up at? So it is important that we do know who our Congress members are, who our Senate people are, because when it all gets said and done, it all, like right now, like you said with the confirmation, there's confirmations that now have to take place. And that happens in a position where that's somebody that we vote in, that's somebody that we say yes or no, we want you in this office. And so it's really important that we know these decisions and who these people are, and that we show up for these elections.
Absolutely. And then Jarrett, the same question about optimism and about values. You know, do you feel like that reckoning and that recognition is something that is now appearing to be more widespread? The knowledge of the power of a vote, you know, more widespread, and the understanding that, you know, we have a real responsibility to know these people and to hold these people accountable, which is what I want to talk about next. But curious your thoughts there.
Yeah, I mean, the power is really in the vote. So to actually get that message out there, especially to our younger generation, right? I believe one of the reasons we actually had this historical turnout is because of the younger generation, that we as older individuals, we really had to encourage them to be accountable for their place within our society, because their voice matters. Their actual place within this system that isn't well. Although we're getting better, the system isn't well. So to actually encourage young people to get out and vote, for me, you know, I watched on Instagram and on Facebook, and I watched everybody with those voting pins. And you know, I looked at that, and I wasn't included in that. I couldn't vote. You know, I've never voted, but thanks to Californians, thanks to people like you, Daniel, and thanks to people like April and every other human being who believes in second chances, who now have put me in a position to also be accountable for my vote, for my place, for my obligation to our democracy. You know, so to actually see what just happened and to know that this isn't the end, I truly believe that this right here is probably one of the greatest starts that we can have as an organization, to know that Californians are adamantly behind rehabilitation, adamantly about or behind care first, you know. So yeah, I'm encouraged, and I'm really proud to be a Californian today, and I'm proud specifically because of what just took place. Again, there's so many other things that we need to change, but today, as a powerful voter, I'm proud to be a Californian.
That's powerful, Jarrett. And you talked about seeing fear and hopelessness. And I saw a lot of that as well. I still see it today. I think there's a lot of fear and desperation as we wait for the results of the election. But I actually find that optimism and hope is vastly underrated in organizing, and that, you know, we have a responsibility to count those wins. And I want to talk about California for a second now, and Prop 17 specifically, where, you know, Californians overwhelmingly voted to restore rights to formerly incarcerated individuals. And I think that will affect something like 50,000 individuals who now will have a right to vote, who will have a voice, who will have the ability to be a part of the civic process. And you know, Jarrett, as someone who that directly impacts, just want to hear, you know, your thoughts on the significance and the message that it sends, not just to yourself and system impacted individuals, but also those who are currently inside, and kind of what tone it sets to those who are impacted.
Yeah, I'm excited. I'm emotional, you know, to actually be a part of. You know, when I was inside of prison, you know, I worked for nothing, right? I worked for 8 cents an hour, and I tell people that all the time, and I hope that it registers that I literally worked for nothing. I came back out into society, and I worked and I paid into a democracy that gave me nothing in return in the sense of having power to vote. So to actually be included, to actually be told with that overwhelming number that I should vote, I shall vote, and it's a must that 50,000 people, new voters, will now be encouraged to actually learn about our civic duty. You know, I'm 37 years old. You know, at 37 years old, the way in which I process is completely different. And to actually be in this place now to where I can actually process exactly what April talked about. You know, who's on those ballots? You know, what are your values? You know, what is the language within those propositions? Who is it going to affect? All those things are things that I'm now encouraged to look into, and I know it's my duty. So to actually be allowed to vote today, it's amazing. It sends a message not only to people that are on parole, but it also sends a message right back to the people who are in prison. We have over 100,000 people in prison. I believe those numbers are slowly coming down. Right out here in California, Governor Newsom is shutting down the prison. So I know that the numbers are gonna begin to come down. But those individuals who are in there, who are deep into their rehabilitation, and even for the people who are not into their rehabilitation, the message was loud, right? It told the people inside that you're valuable. Although you've committed some horrible wrongs, we want you back out into society, but we want to ensure that you're safe. And when you are safe to re-enter society, you will have a place and you will be valuable. You will be heard. And the changes that you want to see, they will be made when you vote for them. So to actually be in this place, man, I'm juiced. I'm excited. I'm a voter.
It's amazing. And the message has to be loud because the legacy is of felony disenfranchisement is very powerful and is large, and it casts a long shadow. April, do you want to talk a little bit about why this message is so important and where we're coming from? You know, from things that were so systemic, so conceived hundreds and hundreds of years ago, that we're now trying to overcome, you know, through wins like this, and why this is so significant to you.
So when you look at the history of our state alone, California has, we've been dealing with felony disenfranchisement since the 1800s. And when you think about like fighting for the right to vote, you think about your ancestors who were not fighting so much for the right to vote. We were fighting for the same rights. We were fighting for equality. And so here we are today, and Prop 17 has been voted in as one. Me, as a person who couldn't vote for 3 years after my release, was a person who could go walk to the polls and go ensure that somebody like Jarrett could vote. So for me, it was a double win because I used my vote to ensure that people like me could vote. But when you look at like historically, like I said, like what this means, it means that we are finally saying that people are equal, that everybody's voice matters, that nobody is a castaway, and that everybody's voice matters. And this goes back back to the 1800s again with convict leasing. Like there's been so many things that have been put into place to suppress the Black vote. And some of the things that have been put in place, well, not even some of the things. When you take it back to the 1800s, like we didn't do anything wrong to have our initial rights stripped. We were Black. And so here we are today, and we're trying to undo laws that have been in place for so long based on convict leasing and Amendment 13. And so to have this win, it's a historic win because the people are finally saying that everybody is equal. They might not understand that they're saying on such a large scale, but they are. To say yes to Prop 17 means that everybody's voice matters, not just some, not just the people who you deem as worthy. Everybody is worthy. And so it's a historic win for people who are incarcerated, formerly incarcerated, and for Black people as a whole. We've been fighting this fight since the 13th Amendment.
Absolutely. And I think people should understand, in California, a lot of the discussion is that reforms and progressive, ballot initiatives like these will automatically pass and are a foregone conclusion. And it's always been great. But I think what you point out, April, around the history is really important because that history exists in California. And so those reforms are under attack at all times. And Prop 20, we should talk about Prop 20 because this is an example. California did not always have a progressive look at the justice system. California's prison population ballooned over the past few decades, or in recent decades, because of truth in sentencing and the three-strike laws. And as a result of that, California's had a huge prison population and really needed to make some changes. And those changes even this year have been, sort of constantly under threat and under the threat of rollback. So April, talk a little bit about, Prop 20 and why it was so important, what Prop 20 was, but why it was so important to reject Prop 20 for California, but also just for the country to see that this is how we feel about prisons.
So Prop 20 was so important to California. And when you look at, I always like to talk about historically, but when you look at what California has done as far as propositions, Prop 47, Prop 57, like we've had these propositions that passed that allowed people to come home, that changed those sentencing laws, that allowed people to come home and get good time credits, that just brought the population down. And so Prop 20 was going to undo all the hard work of Prop 47 and Prop 57, which was reducing recidivism, bringing the prison population down. That's, I look at it like as a fiscal impact. To me, what Prop 20 was going to do was basically they were going to just start putting more people in prison for lower level offenses. If you stole a pair of Jordans, you were now going to be, that misdemeanor was going to now be a felony. And now you have to go be registered with your DNA in the Department of Justice database, thus taking up the population in prison, because now we're just arresting more people and we're not doing any type of reform. We're not doing any type of diversion program. We're just saying, just throw people away. And so Prop 20 was going to, like I say, undo all the hard work that we had done. So for Prop 20 to not pass, it showed that California was on board with this progressive reform that we have been working on for so long. It was almost monumental because we were holding our breath. We weren't sure if Prop 20 was going to pass or not. Like, we didn't know what was going to happen. I mean, that was going to, again, show the heart condition of people. Like, where are we at with this? Because who would Prop 20 have affected the most? Black and brown communities of color. And then here we go, sending all of our Black and brown kids back to jail with these extreme sentences that would have had to, they'd be sitting in prison for 10, 15, 20 years, and we had to do now more reform to bring them home. And so just realizing that California said no, that they were not gonna undo this great work that we had already done was amazing. Like I was happy about Prop 17, I'm not gonna lie, but I was happiest about Prop 20 because Prop 20 failing gives people a chance.
Yeah. Absolutely, that's powerful. And when the prison population ballooned, as you mentioned, April, it was 3-to-1 Black and brown kids, 3-to-1. And so we know that these laws and incarceration affects populations differently, and it's really important that we change the mindset and the philosophy. And defeating Prop 20 was a big part of that. Jarrett, California has spent $100 billion on its justice system since 2010. I think one of the things that April said that's really interesting is we don't need more money spent incarcerating people. And really that reckoning and that difference in philosophy is really important. And I wanted you to just share your thoughts on why it's so important to change that philosophy around how our country views its communities and how California views its communities. What do the communities need the most? And we know for sure that it's not more incarceration and more spending on jails and prisons.
What our communities need is care, right? That's simple, right? Care. But if we just back up Prop 20, let's really talk about where Prop 20 came from. Prop 20 came from law enforcement organizations and associations, the DA Association, up and down the state, the same people who hold guard over our brothers and sisters inside of the prison system. Their union, the CCPOA, was a huge contributor to Prop 20, right? So I really want people to know that, you know, the police unions and the district attorney's offices, right, and their associations were all for locking up brown and black people. So when we say care first, it's the reason why we need care first, because a lot of times we don't have those guardians in our communities watching over our children and our brothers and sisters, right? The same people who are supposed to be the guardians are investing and loaning millions and millions and millions of dollars to actually capture brown and black children and boys and girls. So to actually have Prop 20 be thrown out of California and thrown back at those institutions, it even told them, do something else. Structure your reforms and care, because that's what the people are demanding. When I look at the individuals who are inside of prison, it's been less than 2 years since coming home. You know, I had to go through a huge transition to become safe to re-enter society, and I was almost so sensitive at times in that beginning state to where I could have relapsed back into my criminality. So to actually have Proposition 20 thrown out, right? We actually led with care to the individuals who are still in prison. We're not re-traumatizing them and saying your rehabilitation doesn't matter and that early release isn't possible, right? We have to incentivize rehabilitation. We have to incentivize a willingness to come back out and be a good, safe citizen. And I think with Prop 20, when we threw that out of California, the same thing we did with Prop 17, we send a loud message back into the prisons, because those are the people who will be our next door neighbors. Those are the people who are our brothers and our sisters. Those are the people who are now going to be able to vote. Right? So when I really look at Prop 20, it really goes to show that change is possible. The work that organizations have been doing for years, it's beginning to pay off. It's not the end. It's a must that we continue to push forward, because if not, we will have divisive measures like Prop 20 that will show up and try to undo legislation that was put in place to support people with illnesses, right? And to support people who come from poor communities where second chances are not possible because they never got a first chance. So those are just some of my thoughts when I look at Prop 20. When I think about the calls that I was getting from people inside of prison who were going to Cal State LA, who are actually getting their bachelor's in communication. A guy named Tyson Atlas, he's literally getting his bachelor's in communication because he wants to learn how to communicate better. But he was worried that Prop 20 would pass and that some of those credits that were put out there for him to actually change would be pulled back. So to actually have a no on Prop 20, it's not just a no. It's a yes to rehabilitation. It's a yes to first and second chances. It's a yes to education, right? It's a yes to people inside of prison, and also people like me that are currently on parole, right? Prop 20 would have made it harder for me to be on parole. If I had done something to violate my parole, right? It was more likely that I could be arrested and put back into prison for a minor infraction, right? So to actually have a no on that, um, it's monumental. It's powerful, and I'm grateful because I don't need any more penalties placed on me as a Black man in America. I have enough. Black women have enough. Brown, Black people, we've had enough, and we've been asking for change. We've been demanding change. So now to actually have it, thank you, California.
And thank you to the voter.
So Jarrett talked about all the yeses. I'm going to talk about the one no. It was a no to the people who wrote and co-sponsored this bill, who are also the people who oppose our reform on our legislation, who show up in droves and they have bigger pockets than we do. So it was a no to them, to let them know that not only that California sees what this is, but it's a no to you. Like, no, you can't keep showing up. No, you can't keep bringing your money out. No, you can't keep using your influence to oppose our legislature, because we see you also and we are opposing yours. So it was a no for them, which was amazing because they're our biggest opponents in everything we do for reform.
Great point, April. If I could just add this in, Daniel. One of the things that I noticed when I looked at Prop 20 and 17, I begin to see how divisive both of those propositions were, in the sense of making people choose. It was as if you voted on 17 and you voted yes on 17, then it was almost as if you're soft on crime, right? That you don't believe in second chances. But the same thing goes to Prop 20, right? Some of those commercials that they put out, it was so divisive that it was putting voters in a place of not wanting protection for themselves, and that was a lie. So when I think about the power of the vote, I also think about the importance of educating yourself to ensure that those divisive measures are not placed on our communities. Because when we vote a certain way, people, especially poor communities, you guys, those communities are the ones that actually suffer the most.
Right. And it's a question of what's your values. You know, it's educating yourself, but it's reflecting what are the actual values that you have. There's going to be a lot of misinformation, April, as you mentioned. You know, a lot of money gets spent every time there's a ballot initiative, and it's very difficult sometimes to piece together, you know, what's fact and what's fiction, but thinking through what your values are. And I think this is something that the rest of the country can really learn from. And I think it's something that in California is very good news and is relevant to the county measure J that was also passed. What are our values? Do we want to continue investing in and defending in a system that disproportionately locks up Black and brown individuals, that makes terrible mistakes all the time, that is incredibly costly and does not ultimately work? Or do we actually want to invest in our communities? And so to those organizations, to those agencies that authored Prop 20, it's a no. We want to invest. We want to invest in ourselves. We want to invest in our own success and in our own communities. And I think taking back that control and changing that narrative that it all comes down to prisons equating, or prisons leading to public safety or public health is a really important moment of recognition here in California. And I think it's going to be important for the rest of the country to realize that as well. Let's talk a little bit about Measure J, which directs 10% of the unrestricted budget back into proven alternatives to incarceration at the county level, and what that really means. That is a significant, huge investment in the communities, and really takes back control of that narrative that spending needs to be towards law enforcement, towards prisons, jails, and all of the things that historically California unfortunately has spent quite a bit of money on and still is spending quite a bit of money on. But April, would love for you to sort of react to what this signals and what the rest of the country can learn from Measure J, which we should give a shout out to the Reimagine LA coalition that really just fiercely got this on the ballot and pushed it through. And co-chairs Unisys and Isaac, who through their leadership really did an incredible job, and all the other organizations, I believe over 100 here in California that signed on to it. But April, just share what that means, that level of community investment into proven alternatives to incarceration through Measure J.
So what Measure J brings up to me in my thought process is, for the last few months, we've heard a lot about defund the police, defund the police, defund the police. And so what Measure J did is they took 10% of this unrestricted fund, and they said, we want to give this into jail diversion, mental health care, housing, youth development. And that's what we meant by defund the police. Like, people thought we meant, let's get rid of all the police, fire the police, defund the police. No, let's take some of that budget that they get and put it into our communities. That way we're doing the proper diversion. That way our communities are also benefiting from these finances that flow into these offices that should be for the communities anyway. But law enforcement or these government agencies touch it first. So by the time it gets to the community, there's not much left for them. And so to me, this is what defund the police, if they really wanted to see a model of defund the police where it doesn't seem harmful, it doesn't seem like we're just being radical and we're just trying to overthrow government, this is a perfect idea of what that looks like, to where we're investing into our communities, we're investing into our youth, we're investing into mental health, where when you look at a lot of the people who might be being criminalized by the system, by these officers, a lot of them are just people who need mental health care. They're not criminals running around here. They're just people who need mental health care. And so Measure J being passed in Los Angeles County, the largest system of incarceration in the state, like, that's historic and monumental at the same time, because I'm from Los Angeles and I've been around since, because I'm older, so I've been around through different scandals, the Rampart scandals, like different things. So to see Los Angeles say, okay, this is what we're doing, wow, we're taking a step in the right direction. And so it's a win. I'm really excited for what this says to the rest of the other counties and to the rest of the nation.
Absolutely. Yeah. And Jarrett, talk about that change in mindset, the idea that there are better ways to achieve public health and safety, the idea that we can take control of the narrative and invest in ourselves, and the idea that, a lot of the fear around decreasing any kind of spending around prisons or the justice system or law enforcement will lead to just complete chaos. The false narrative. Talk about what this really shows for LA County, but also what the rest of the country needs to learn from it.
One of the things it shows is Los Angeles leadership, right? It's a model that I believe first my hope is that it goes up and down the state of California, and that it begins to break out of the state, because this is what we need. We have over 2 million people inside of our prisons in our country, right? It's not just California. So when I think about care, instead of jail, I think about that nationally. We have a real sickness when it comes to enslaving people inside of our prisons. So to actually have a model where there's care and where there's a demand to actually take those funds from those institutions that at times harm brown and Black communities. So to actually see Los Angeles step up and be a leader in that space, it's real encouraging. It's also one of those things where when we look at 10%, 10%, that $100 or so million, the programs that those funds are going to go into, our hope is that it literally changes the landscape in those brown and Black communities. When I think about the people who are inside of prison, these are the people who have already harmed the same community that more than likely harmed them. When I think of their rehabilitation, these funds are going to go to community-based organizations, right? When it's time for a person to actually get real and say, I need to change, I need to be better, I want to be a safe person, right? I want to re-enter society. That process is best when it's through the assistance of someone that came from the same community that you harmed, right? So to see us defund the police and invest back into the people, I can really see how restorative justice practices are now being implemented within our system, right? Because it's that care, right? And a part of that care, it's structured around investments. So to have that 10% investment, which is not enough. I don't want to sit back and make it seem like 10% is enough. It's not, right? I don't want to take away from the fact that it's a nice amount, but it's just the beginning. I would like to see 50% invested back into our communities, right? I would like to see care first and a real limited amount of punishment, especially when it comes to people with mental health issues, especially with people who suffer from drug and alcohol abuse. We can look at Oregon and the legislation that was just passed, where those low-level offenses will no longer send you to prison. Right? I would love to see the day when Los Angeles becomes the leader in care for those diseases such as alcohol and drugs, and no longer an incarcerator of sick people. Yeah.
I would like to add one more point to that. Jarrett, you just said that like 10% and you would like to see 50%. And the part that stuck out to me is 42% right now of the LA County budget is spent on law enforcement and on the legal system. And that's $1.75 billion. So 10% is a small fraction of 42%. But if we were to get, let's say, to a higher number, all we're saying is we're just taking some of the money that you would be spending on these legal systems and on the law enforcement that we're going to try to stop criminalizing people. So we're just going to take a little bit more fraction of that and put it more into the people so that we can continue on not criminalizing people. So I just wanted to throw out the numbers to what you just said, because I don't think that people understand like the contrast to the actual number.
Yeah, it's incredible. And to be in the middle of a pandemic where, even in the state of California, we could not afford protective equipment for essential workers, for those who are currently incarcerated, couldn't make those investments, but to see such a large portion of the budget continue to go towards prison and the justice system is really striking to a lot of people. I want to talk a little bit nationally, big picture, about accountability. I think one of the things that's really important, even in the midst of successful organizing and wins around ballot propositions and certain elections in the country, and we're seeing a lot of great things around the country. People are voting for district attorneys that match their values, and that's really important and incredible, and that the same is true for judges and otherwise. And I think that's something that we're seeing across the board. There's a lot of recognition that these elected officials have power and they need to be held accountable. So I want to talk about accountability. We are, as we wait for the results of this current general election, really going to be tasked with holding an administration accountable, either a second term administration or a brand new administration. And, I would love to hear your thoughts, starting with you, April, on the importance of accountability and accountability among our elected officials. I mean, it's one thing to organize and to achieve a successful result in an election and make certain promises and create a platform that that may or may not resonate with some people. But talk a little bit about the importance of accountability and the work to be done. You know, the problems that we're facing are not problems of 3.5 years, as you mentioned earlier. They're problems of hundreds of years. And so this is about momentum, and this is about really long-term objectives. Talk a little bit about the importance of holding a new administration accountable.
So it's a very controversial thing for me. For those people who know me know that I like to say what I like to say, even when people don't agree, especially because it's the truth. So when you think about accountability on a national level, like we're looking at two candidates right now. One who, in my opinion, has not been held accountable for anything that he has said or done. And then we have a new running mate who has done some things in the past that would cause Black and brown communities to be fearful of him stepping into office. And so with that, the hope is that if Biden does win, the hope is that he stands true to his new stance on reform and his new stance on how he feels towards Black and brown communities. And I think a lot of that is on us and how we show up as communities and how we hold people accountable. Because now if he is elected into this office and he does all these things that he said he was gonna do, okay, so thank you, sir, for doing what you said you're gonna do, and we see you and we support you. But if he gets into office and he doesn't do or behave in a manner in which we deem as the leader, that the person that should be the leader of us, that means we have to organize and then show up and hold him accountable to his word. I'm trying to say this as eloquently as possible because I always want to say this is a budget, but I can't. And so a lot of that also goes into your Congress and your Senate and your Supreme Court people, like making sure that who you are putting into these, that you're showing up to those elections, because people think that they look at these big elections, they look at the local elections, they don't look at the Congress and the Senate, they don't look at these other elections that we need to show up to as well. Because they were running right now, and how many people like actually showed up and really knew who these people were that were running and knew what their belief systems were, knew what they stood for, and like, so I understand that fear mongering is real. People, the media and these candidates are gonna say stuff to cause the people to be fearful, but it's up to us to go figure out like what is truth and what is fact and what have we seen, not what people are telling us. And that's all based on education. I literally broke my ballot down. And I Googled who was who, I Googled what was what. If you were for having police officers in school, you're not getting my vote. But I'm only gonna know that if I'm checking out the candidate and seeing what is important. And so us, the Young Women's Freedom Center, like we released a voter's guide that talks about every election, from the presidential election to the local elections, to the Congress, to the Senate, to every single election that there is, so that you know the timelines and the frames around that, so that you show up to these. Because if we're not showing up, how can we hold somebody accountable? I think that's really the only way we'll ever see accountability, is if we hold people accountable. But with accountability, I think at the same time, that's why certain things didn't pass, or certain measures or propositions don't pass, because accountability has been our issue with people. Like they tell us what we want to hear, and then when they get in office, they don't do. And we've seen historically that everybody that has power does not know what to do with it, or they don't know how to be, they can't be trusted with it. And so I think the next 4 years will show us, as a people who are now like really looking towards voting and what does it look like to vote, and are trying to educate ourselves on voting, the next 4 years will shape our next 4 years and how we show up to these polls. So I think it's all about holding people accountable, and then really being mindful of when they're not doing what they say they're gonna do, and then making the mental note to make sure that we show up to put the people in these positions that we need, who have our interests.
That's exactly right. And I think it's not just the commitment to educating yourself and to showing up, but a commitment to a long memory of the history of the actions of our elected officials, the origins of a lot of these issues, as you mentioned, with the voter toolkit and understanding, within the context of voter suppression, felony disenfranchisement, the different types of elected officials and how they can operate. We have to have a commitment to having a long memory about these things so that we can truly reflect on the direction that things are going, and reflect on the accountability and behavior of our elected officials. And Jarrett, curious if you feel the same way about holding individuals accountable. Obviously, as April mentioned, Biden has a very troubled past in terms of justice reform, and the 1994 crime bill, and you can see 12 minutes of testimony around really denigrating comments that sort of describe those who've interacted with the justice system as irredeemable. And so a commitment to having that long memory, but also embracing the idea that this individual can be held accountable moving forward. Would love to hear your thoughts on that.
Yeah, I look at both candidates, and I can see where Trump, he's done some horrible things, and one of the things that I'm gonna go towards is what he said about those children in New York, where they were 100% innocent, and he wanted them to still suffer. He wanted them to outright suffer. He wanted children to suffer, even though we knew that they were innocent. And even if they were even if they were guilty, we shouldn't be forcing children to suffer inside of prison, right? But as the president, horrible. So holding him accountable when it comes to that mindset, not only his past, but even his mindset moving forward, right? I believe that both sides need to figure out, some type of balance, because we don't know who's going to become the president, but finding ways to bridge the gap, it's a must, because we all have to live here, right? And when it comes to Biden, he furthered that narrative of children who were super predators. There's no such thing, right? It's a horrible term, and that term locked up 2,500 children. Right? It cast children away with a sentence of death by incarceration, and I'm one of them. I'm one of the people that Biden is responsible for sending away, for killing off inside of prison. Kamala Harris, she was also someone who did everything she could to stop the work of Brian Stevenson in Milledgeville, Alabama, when I was seeking my first chance back out into society. So for me, when I think of accountability, I can look at those three people, including Pence, and I know that there's a huge role. I also believe in second chances when we're bridging the gap. The same way I needed a second chance, regardless of what candidate wins. Second chances and tolerance is going to be a must for the next 4 years, right? We're in a pandemic, right? And we don't know what else is to come. So I look forward to seeing whichever candidate gets in office. I look forward to them leading this country in a responsible and an ethical way that actually bridges the gap between all of the division and actually provides some care, right? So we can get rid of some of this fear that has been imposed due to all of the division and hatred that's been just spread over the last 100 years. So those are my thoughts on accountability, y'all.
And if it is a Biden administration, taking that viewpoint, April and Jarrett, our commitment is not to parties or individuals as much as it is to a set of values and to a set of people who are impacted by a system. That's our commitment. And so we are holding people accountable for the benefit of changing the system, of making it more fair, of making it more just. of investing in communities. And so I think that's really, the main takeaway that I think people need to understand is that it's not so much about the situation didn't start and won't conclude with a particular party or a particular individual in office. You really need to know and understand your values and stay true to what those values are, and hold your elected officials, whomever they are, whether you voted for them or not, to those values. And I think that's ultimately what I hope people take away from this election. However it concludes, our commitment is to each other. Our commitment is to the idea of hope and redemption and transformation. And that's really the real story that needs to be told, and the work left to be done is for the greater good of that, and not for the furtherance of a party or particular individual. This was an incredible discussion that we've had today. I hope we brought a sufficient amount of hope and also perspective to those who are watching. It's obviously a very difficult time for everyone. The uncertainty is difficult. Emotionally, it's difficult. Mentally, it's very exhausting. And so, I would just remind people to be kind to each other, and also to be hopeful, because it's hope that drives me, and I think it's hope and the ability and belief to make an impact that causes us to get up as advocates. And so, April and Jarrett, I would love to end with maybe just one thing that gives you hope, one thing that sort of pulls hope out of you and energizes you in the face of even incredible uncertainty or adversity. What is it that propels you out of bed and causes you to really be hopeful about this work and about the future? April, maybe starting with you.
I think the thing that for me, like when I think about propelling me out of bed, I'm in a place and I am a person that I did not know I could be. I did not know I'd be living the life that I live. I did not know that I would have the opportunities or the platforms that I have, and that people would, with substantial platforms, believe and want to further me, my career, and the way I show up in this world. So that's one thing that that I get up for. Another thing is just basic human kindness. Like when you look at somebody, let's say you are a person on the outside and you're watching somebody be kind to another person. How does that make you feel? It makes you feel good to watch somebody else give kindness to another person. And so human kindness is also another thing, because it's our choice on how we choose to show up in this world. And do you choose to show up kind, or do you choose to show up mean? Me personally, I'm a little abrasive, but I choose to show up kind. And so human kindness gets me out of my bed.
I don't know what you're talking about by abrasive, April. I've never heard of that. I don't know what you mean. Jarrett, same question around hope. Where do you draw your hope and your inspiration from for this work, even during difficult moments?
I have to go inward. When I think of hope, I think of my values, and my values actually keep me hopeful, because my values they demand that I teach other people to be kind, as April talked about. My values teach me and demand that I'm supposed to be of service, and that I am in service on a daily basis. Hope for me is developed when I'm able to help someone else become successful, right? That's my success, when I can help and uplift and support another individual without expecting anything in return, except that their life is better. So those values that I have inside actually keep me hopeful, but also the power of choice, right? We're in uncertain times. Man's Search for Meaning. I read this book when I was in prison, and it stuck with me. Viktor Frankl talked about the power of choice, even in uncertain times. That power literally propelled me not just out of bed, but out of prison, because of how I chose to view life. how I chose to view people. So the power of choice keeps me hopeful, keeps me motivated. It's the fuel that that I actually ingest on a daily basis to know that I have choice in the way in which I show up on an everyday basis. How can you not be hopeful when when you have choice? So yeah.
How can you not be hopeful when you have choice? That is a powerful statement, Jarrett. And I think, with that, I would recommend everyone go to representjustice.org, where you can learn more about all of our efforts, connect with April and Jarrett, who are just incredible forces in the field and advocates. And, to really respect that power of choice, because not everyone has it. Try to bring yourself closer to the issues that we've discussed today. Educate yourself on your elected officials, the importance of voting, the history of voting. You can go to www.representjustice.org/freeourvote to learn more about that and view our voting toolkit as well. And to be strong, to be kind, be empathetic, and also to be hopeful. And thank you all so much for joining us this afternoon, and we look forward to speaking with you again soon. Take care.
Take care. Bye, you guys.
All right, the stream should be stopped. I'll bring Gretel and Alexa and Monse back.
Oh, girl, you be lighting it up.
You.
Y'all were both on fire.
And I didn't cuss.
Did you not cuss?
Off brand. You were off brand.
I thought you might have cussed once or twice, but maybe I imagined it, April.
Oh, maybe it was so small that it was only once or twice, and I was like, I didn't do it at all.
Yeah. That's no. It was that was a great discussion, moving, very powerful by you all. We hit 17, 20. We didn't hit 25 directly, but I think we got a lot of good discussion about Jay in there, which was really really important. So very, very happy about that. Well done.
It's always so cool to actually share space and actually share perspective, right? I mean, we can come on